I've been an artist for many years. Looking back, there are so many lessons that I wish I've learned earlier in my career, or someone could just show me in a video. This is the video. Hi, if you're new here, my name is Esther Nariyoshi. I am a working illustrator based in the US. Let's get to work. Tip number 1, plan for or work with your creative blocks. If you have been practicing art for any length of time, you probably already know this. The creative blocks are unavoidable. Most of the advice that I hear are how to avoid them or how to overcome creative blocks. But really, my advice is to work with it because they're not avoidable and there are strategies that you can implement in your practice to make it work for you. In addition to an illustrator, I'm also a brush maker, which means that I make a lot of realistic textures for digital brushes. So I reserve the texture making days for the days that I feel like I cannot pull out anything creative out of my soul and I don't feel inspired, things don't come out right when I draw. So when I realize that the creative block is here, I pull out my list to look through the tasks that does not require creativity. For example, making textures. They are somewhat mechanical if you really think about it. On days like this, I will just pull out my supplies and look through the textures that I need to make and make them, scan them to get them ready and documented so that I can use them to create new brushes when I'm ready. You probably have tasks like this. For example, if you paint watercolor or any type of medium, you probably would love some swatches. For the most part, swatching doesn't really need creativity. So, on the days that you don't feel like you are inspired, you can do swatching. I'm sure if you look at your creative practice, you can separate the tasks that needs creativity and tasks that don't. So reserve these second category tasks to the days that you hit a creative block. Tip number 2, this is probably the easiest thing to do, is to turn your phone on do not disturb. It turns out that a lot of things can wait. So I have customized a configuration where there's a list of friends and families can get through this block. Other than that, people can leave a voicemail, they can text and be unread for a few hours because you need to protect your concentration. When you're in a creative flow, which is hard to come by at times, you need to protect it. The last thing you need to know is to answer a phone call on whether you need lawn service or not when you're painting. What I've learned after practicing this for years is that slowly people will realize that you do not respond immediately. And there is also more built in patience and grace for you for that regard. So turn your phone on do not disturb when you're working. Tip number 3, set a timer. It is that simple. I do have a timer that looks like this. It does exactly one thing. So you wind it up and it will beep when the timer is done. This really helps me to get into a task that I feel a lot of resistance to. For example, if someday I don't really have a plan, I just want to mess around on a sketchbook, by having a timer, it helps me to get started and avoid overthinking because I only have that limited time window to work on things. And also give yourself permission to either keep on going after the time is up or walk away from it and switch to a different task. In that way, it can really take away some of the initial friction of task switching. Tip number 4, have a notebook for brain dump thoughts. If you're creative, it's very likely that you're working on multiple projects in a parallel way. So on the day, you might do a lot of task switching. And sometimes when you're working on project one, you might have inspiration for project three, and you need a place to write it down. So this notebook is where I just download my thoughts. You don't have to organize it or keep it neat. You just put down one bullet point at a time, and you can always organize it later. That naturally goes to the next point, which is celebrate smaller wins. If you're a creative running your own business, it's very likely you're also your own marketer, your own videographer, your own editor, CPA. You wear many hats at the same time. For that reason, sometimes you feel like you have done a lot of like smaller tasks, but not really accomplishing like one portfolio piece or things like that. It is really helpful to document the things that you have done and things that you have finished so that mentally you can be rewarded for the smaller wins. For example, maybe someday all you did was to update your website and there is only one section that looks slightly different, but it took you whole day. So celebrate a moment like this because you have done something great for your business and you have moved forward. It might not be creatively inspiring, but it's worth celebrating. Tip number 6, keep a regular sketchbook. I'm a digital artist primarily, so I work on screen a lot, whether on computer or on my iPad. But I think it's so important or even crucial to have a physical sketchbook. The reason is that on the screen, for most programs or apps, you can undo. That can be great when when you have a clear vision, but it can also be really hard because you can be working for hours, but when you look back, just because the amount of undo, you don't really have a lot left on your canvas. It's different when you're working on a sketchbook in a way that you're forced to work with your mistakes. You're forced to creatively use the space to work around elements that is already on the page. Over time, you also accumulate a lot of visual vocabulary for yourself just because you cannot undo on paper. And it's so helpful. Even if it's just 15 minutes a day, it can be really helpful for your long term growth. Tip number 7, build your email list early. Many of the artists are on social media, but you know that we have very little control because of algorithm. We don't know how often or who your posts are going to be shown to, but it's a different story with your email list. Your email list has people who chose to be on it, chose to join your journey and hear your stories. And it also takes a long time to build. Even if you feel like you haven't reached the point of your career where you're super proud, but just start early and communicate as often or as little as you want. Because this is a long game, it takes time. It's really, really helpful to start early. Tip number 8, not everything has to be posted. This is more like a mind shift. Over a period of time, I feel really hard to create. When I really dig deeper into my fears, I realize that I look at my work in the eyes of a social media viewer instead of seeing my sketchbook as a playground. So, really remind yourself not everything has to be a post. Sometimes you can just create for the fun of it. If it turns out great, you can post it, but otherwise, you can keep it to yourself. Like I said, as an artist, you need to grow that visual vocabulary. So, this is part of it. Just open up a sketchbook and play, and you don't have to post it. Tip number 9, separate yourself from your work. I think this is probably one of the really important lessons. Thankfully, I've learned it early on that you are more than your work. Artists oftentimes are very invested in their work, which I can really identify. You feel like your work is part of you. But there is a problem with that. If your work receive less attention, or if your work didn't come out great as you expected, you feel like you can lose that much worth together with your work. So you need a healthy distance between your work and yourself. You are much more worthier than your work. So even if sometimes your work doesn't come out great, or didn't have a great reception, you're still okay. You need to build your identity on something that is bigger than your work, or something that is even bigger than you. So when life events happens, you don't crumble with it. All right, these are the 9 lessons that I really wish someone have set me down at the beginning of my career and taught me. And now you watched it all in a video. I hope you enjoy the advice. I would love to hear which one resonate most with you. I'll see you in the next video.